My husband left me for his mistress, abandoning me with debts and a mortgage. But my 11-year-old son said, I got revenge on Dad. A week later, my husband called me in tears. Before we continue, let us know which country you're watching from. Enjoy the story. David stood in the hallway, holding a travel bag. Emily was watching him from the kitchen, leaning against the door frame. Her stomach clenched into an icy knot. She knew this day would come, felt it in her gut, but kept hoping it wouldn't. It did. I'm leaving, David said in a low voice, avoiding her gaze. Emily stayed silent. She could see his trembling hands, how he nervously shifted from foot to foot. Over all their years of marriage, she had come to know him like the back of her hand. She knew every wrinkle by his eyes, every mole on his back. And now, looking at this confused man, she realized she was losing him forever. To whom? She finally forced out, trying to keep her voice steady. David hesitated. He looked away for a long time, as if searching for words. Emily held her breath. To Chloe, he whispered, lowering his head. It felt like a punch to Emily's gut. Chloe, the young thing from his office. She had always sensed that girl looked at David differently, but she brushed those thoughts away, refusing to believe it. How could you, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. How could you do this to us, to Lucas? David sighed. I didn't mean for it to happen, he mumbled. I love Chloe. I love her. That word sounded like a verdict. Emily closed her eyes. The pain pierced her like a shard of glass. She remembered their wedding, Lucas's birth, their plans for the future. All of it collapsed in an instant. What about the mortgage? She asked, opening her eyes. What about the debts? Did you even think about how we're going to live? David shrugged. I'll help, he promised. I'll send money. Emily let out a bitter laugh. She didn't believe a single word. She knew Chloe would drain him dry, and there would be neither time nor money left for his family. Go, she said, turning away. Just go. David left without another word. Emily was alone. She stood there for a long time, frozen. Tears streamed down her face, burning her cheeks. She sobbed like a child who had lost a favorite toy. She cried for the broken family, for shattered dreams, for lost love. How would she tell Lucas? What would she say to her son, who adored his father? How could she explain that Dad didn't live with them anymore because he loved another woman? Emily got up and went to the living room. Lucas was sitting at the table, doing homework. He looked up at her with his big, anxious brown eyes. Mom, what happened? He asked with a frown. Why are you crying? Emily sat beside him and hugged him. She didn't know what to say. Dad left, she whispered, tears rising again. Lucas pulled away and looked at her in surprise. Left? Where? To another woman, Emily replied, trying to sound calm. Lucas's face twisted in pain and confusion. He said nothing, staring blankly, then suddenly jumped up and ran out of the room. Emily heard his bedroom door slam. After David left, life became pure survival, utility bills, food, all of it weighed on her like a crushing burden. She had to take night shifts at the hospital just to make ends meet. She worked herself to the bone, forgetting about herself, her health, her needs. Lucas withdrew into himself. He stopped smiling, stopped sharing his thoughts. It was as if a wall had grown between them. Emily felt his pain. One day, after returning from a night shift, Emily found a note on the table from Lucas. Mom, I love you. I'll try to help you. Tears welled up again in Emily's eyes. She knew things weren't easy for him either. He was doing his best, but he was just a child. The only ray of light in her dark life was her neighbor Margaret, a kind and wise woman. She visited every evening, bringing tea and pastries, listening to her sorrows and offering advice. Don't lose hope, Emily, Margaret would say, gently patting her hand. Things will get better. Life is full of ups and downs. After the dark comes the light. Emily listened and believed. She believed that things would get better. She believed she could overcome every challenge. She believed she could give Lucas a decent future. A few days later, Lucas stunned Emily with a mysterious phrase. Mom, I got revenge on Dad. Please tell me, she pleaded. Lucas hesitated, nibbling his lip. Don't worry, Mom. I got into his computer and sent it to someone, he muttered quietly. Sent what? What did you find? Emily felt a wave of panic wash over her. There were some documents about money. You know how Dad always liked to get involved in different things. I thought that if I scared him a little, he'd feel ashamed and come back, Lucas explained, looking at his mother hopefully. Emily recoiled in horror. You did what? She exclaimed, trying not to raise her voice. Lucas frowned. But I just wanted to help you, to make him come back, he protested. Sweetheart, you can't help like that. You should have talked to me before doing anything. Now we don't know what the consequences might be, Emily said, feeling her knees go weak. She knew the most important thing now was to calm down and try to understand the situation. But how could she, when her heart was pounding out of her chest? All right, let's not talk about this now. I need time to think, Emily said, getting up. And please, don't do anything else without talking to me first. Lucas nodded, lowering his head. He clearly felt guilty. Emily turned away and walked to the window. The sun was shining outside, but inside her, a storm was raging. She didn't know what to do next, how to handle this news. How to protect Lucas and herself from possible consequences. That evening, after Lucas finished his homework, Emily sat next to him and took his hand in hers. Lucas, I need to know exactly what you sent to your father and to whom. It's very important, she said gently. Lucas sighed and looked at his mother with a guilty expression. I found some files in the work folder on Dad's computer. There were numbers and graphs. I didn't really understand any of it, but I thought there was something bad there, he said. So I sent it to the email addresses from Dad's messages. One of them was his boss. Emily closed her eyes. It was much worse than she had imagined. Sending compromising material directly to the boss, that was the surest way to destroy David's career. Lucas, do you understand that you might have ruined your father's life? She asked, trying to hold back her anger. Lucas burst into tears. I didn't mean to. Emily hugged her son, pulling him close. She understood that he only wanted to help, but his naive action could have catastrophic consequences. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about everything that had happened. She felt cornered. On one hand, she was angry at David for his betrayal and selfishness. On the other, she didn't want Lucas to become an outcast, and she didn't want David to lose his job and livelihood, even though he had caused her so much pain. But what could she do? She felt completely helpless. Margaret came over the next day. She brought a freshly baked pie and sat beside Emily on the couch. What's wrong, Emily? Margaret listened silently, stroking her hand. Yes, it's a tough situation, she said when Emily finished her story. But don't lose hope, dear. It'll all work out. Lucas acted like a child. He didn't understand what he was doing. And David, well, he's responsible for his own troubles. You can't build happiness on someone else's pain. But I don't want him to suffer for what happened, Emily exclaimed. Emily, you can't be responsible for other people's actions. David made his own choices. And Lucas, he needs to learn that revenge isn't the answer. But don't be too hard on him. He only wanted to protect you. A week after Lucas's action, David called Emily. His voice was full of tears and despair. Emily, it's David, he whispered, and there wasn't a trace of the confidence he once had when he left. I feel terrible. Emily froze. She didn't want to hear him, didn't want to know about his problems. She had more than enough of her own. But something inside her, a long-forgotten sense of compassion, made her stay silent and listen. What happened? She asked coldly, keeping herself composed. David was choking up. Everything came out. Emily stayed quiet, pretending she knew nothing. I got fired, Emily. Completely. Now I have no job, no money, nothing. My name, everyone's talking about me. Everyone knows who I am. David's voice broke. Emily felt nausea rise in her throat. And that's not all, David continued, as if unaware of her silence. Chloe, she left. Just packed her things and walked out. Said she didn't need a loser with debts. Emily wasn't surprised. She had never believed in Chloe's sincerity. It was just a shiny wrapper hiding emptiness. But now wasn't the time for smugness. David, what do you want from me? Emily finally asked, trying to speak calmly. Silence filled the line. It seemed David was gathering his courage. Help me, Emily, please. I know I was awful. I ruined everything. But I don't know what to do. I'm desperate. Please help me make sense of this. Emily closed her eyes. He was asking her for help, after everything he'd done. After all the pain he had caused her and Lucas. Did he really think she could? Images of the past weeks flashed in her mind, her late-night tears, fear for the future, anxiety for Lucas. All of it, his fault. And now he was asking for her help. There was no anger or pity in her voice, only firmness. I can't help you. I don't want to help you. You made your choice. You destroyed your life. Now you have to face the consequences. But Emily. David began. She cut him off. Goodbye, David. Don't call me again. She ended the call and tossed the phone aside. Her hands were trembling, and she felt drained, as if after hard labor. She felt sorry for David, but that pity couldn't outweigh the pain he had caused her. She couldn't let him back into her life to destroy the little she had left. That evening, when Lucas came home from school, Emily decided to talk to him. How was school? She asked, trying to sound casual. Lucas shrugged. He seemed withdrawn, avoiding her gaze. Emily understood he felt guilty. Dad called today, Emily said, watching his reaction. Lucas flinched but remained silent. He got fired. Lucas lowered his head. That's sad, he said quietly. I know you wanted to help me, she whispered, stroking his hair. But sometimes our actions have consequences we don't expect. You're not to blame for what happened. Your father is. He made his own choices. You only wanted to protect me. Lucas cried on her shoulder. Emily knew he needed time to process everything, but she was there to support him, to help him through this difficult time. That night, as Emily drifted to sleep, she thought about her life. She knew she needed to move on, to start a new life. And she decided to do everything she could to be happy, to give Lucas a happy future. David, having lost everything, desperately tried to get his family back. But Emily firmly refused to take him back. He came several times, disheveled with empty eyes, telling her that Chloe wasn't who he thought she was, and that his job was the only thing keeping him afloat. And now he was nobody. Emily listened, looked at his pitiful state, but her heart had no room left for pity. Only exhaustion and a firm belief that the past was gone forever. David, understand this, there's no going back, she told him calmly. You made your choice. You destroyed our family. I can't trust you anymore, and I don't want to. Lucas, observing these scenes from a distance, felt conflicted. On the one hand, he felt sorry for his father, he saw his suffering. On the other, he remembered his mother's tears, her sleepless nights, her despair. He understood she was right, some things can't be forgiven. Emily moved on with her life without looking back. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready. She no longer felt like the weak and confused woman she had been just months ago. David's betrayal, paradoxically, had made her stronger. With support from her neighbor and colleagues, Emily began taking private clients for medical procedures. At first, these were small side jobs, injections, bandages, consultations. She visited patients after work, tired but satisfied that she was finally earning a little more. Margaret helped Emily in every way she could. She watched over Lucas when Emily was out, and her support was invaluable. Don't lose heart, Emily, Margaret would say. Everything will come together. You're a strong woman. Just believe in yourself. Emily's colleagues also didn't stand aside. They recommended her to friends, shared their experience, and helped her find equipment. Emily felt she wasn't alone, that people around her were ready to support her. Gradually, the number of clients grew. Emily realized she needed her own medical office. But where could she get money for rent, equipment, advertising? Still, Emily didn't give up. She saved every penny, took extra shifts, and studied information about small businesses. One day, talking to Margaret, Emily shared her dream. Margaret, I want to open my own practice, she said. But I don't know how. I don't have the money. Margaret listened attentively, then said, Emily, remember what you do have. You have knowledge. You have experience. You have hands that heal. Money will come, just start. Those words inspired Emily. She decided to take the risk. She took all her savings and found a suitable space. The room needed repairs, but Emily wasn't afraid. She did everything with her own hands, painted the walls, laid linoleum, installed new plumbing. Her colleagues helped with equipment. Someone gave her an old exam table, someone else donated a physiotherapy device. Margaret gave her houseplants to make the space cozy. It was a small but clean and bright room with everything needed for basic medical care. Emily hung a sign on the door that read Medical Office. She felt proud and happy. She had done it. She had overcome all the difficulties and started a new life. The first patients came by word of mouth. They were pleased with her professionalism, her ability to listen and support. Emily healed not just the body but the soul. Gradually, everyone in the neighborhood heard about Emily's clinic. People came with all kinds of problems, from colds to chronic illnesses. Emily never refused anyone who needed help. She worked from morning till night, sparing no effort. Her financial situation improved, and she was able to send Lucas to a summer camp. She no longer felt poor or miserable. She had gained financial independence and confidence in herself. Emily and Lucas were learning to build their life from scratch, realizing that betrayal had become the starting point for a new, happier destiny. They became closer to each other. They learned to appreciate what they had. Lucas was proud of his mom, of how she helped people, how she became stronger and more confident every day. He understood that she was his hero. David occasionally called Emily, but she no longer answered his calls. She didn't want to stir up the past. She lived in the present and dreamed of the future. One day, while walking through the park with Lucas, Emily saw David. He was sitting on a bench, alone, looking downcast and aged. He looked at Emily, but she turned her gaze away. She didn't want to say anything to him. She looked at Lucas and smiled. He smiled back. They held hands and continued walking, toward their new happiness. That fall, Emily's clinic celebrated its 1-year anniversary. What had started as a modest room with second-hand equipment was now a warm and welcoming place, filled with grateful patients and the scent of fresh flowers that people often brought her in thanks. One evening, after a long day, Margaret stopped by with 2 cups of tea. "You've come so far, Emily," she said with a smile. "Do you remember how lost you felt a year ago?" Emily nodded, her eyes misty. "Sometimes I still can't believe it. But you believed in me before I believed in myself." Margaret gently touched her arm. "You just needed a little spark. The rest, that was all you." That night, Emily stood at the window, watching the stars. Lucas was asleep in his room, peaceful and safe. For the first time in a long while, she felt whole. A knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, she found a small envelope on the mat. Inside was a card, "To the woman who reminded the world what strength looks like. Thank you for not giving up." It was unsigned. She smiled, pressed the card to her chest, and looked up at the sky. The past no longer hurt. The future didn't scare her. She had survived, rebuilt, and risen, not just for herself, but for her son, for everyone who once believed they couldn't. And that truly was her happy ending.